All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Launchpad Podcast. I am your host, Gabriel Hardy, and in this episode today, I had the honor of interviewing one of my good buddies, Jake Matthews. Jake Matthews has the YouTube channel and the TikTok channel, JakeKnowsNothing, and he creates all of this psychedelic, esoteric, edgy content. And here, as of late, he has been creating this series on TikTok that's gained a lot of traction, a lot of popularity. I think rightfully so. And what it's about is something called the GATE program. It's about these nationwide gifted and talented programs that were all across the United States. And there's all of these weird sort of commonalities between people who are in this program. There's a bunch of most people who are in these programs seem to have a vague, foggy memory of it and what exactly went on. But with the things that they do remember seem kind of odd. And so we really unpack a lot of this in this episode. I myself went through one of these gifted and talented programs, so we talk a bit about that. Jake did as well too. It essentially seems like the CIA's or the government's like westernized, widespread sort of form of shamanic recruiting, and that's a very simplified, bastardized version of it, but yeah, it's a really interesting episode. I hope you guys enjoy it. Jake's awesome. Go check out his shit. It'll be down in the description, show notes, whatever you're listening to this on. But other than that, I really appreciate you tapping back into the Launchpad Podcast. Peace out and much love.
Or it just doesn't really take off at all. You put out 100 videos and maybe one of them gets a couple, thousand views. But yeah, the response was really overwhelming, and it wasn't like I figured if anything, I would get a lot of feedback of people being like, oh, like, you're insane, you're schizophrenic, you're a conspiracy theorist. But no, it was the opposite, where like 95% of the feedback and comments and DMs was like, you hit this, like, hit the nail on the head. You read me like a book. You described my whole experience. It's freaking me out too. So that was kind of, there's comfort in that, obviously, in like finding other people who have these weird experiences also.
Yeah, man. Whenever I was watching that series, chills were going down my spine because of some of the things that you were. So like the commonalities, right? And like
right.
we'll get into that within the conversation. I'm sure you saw I went ahead and just pressed start because like this always happens. I talk, and there's like all this good shit said before you hit record. I know. So we're just gonna informally hit record, but yeah, man. Okay. So I guess that this will be the start of it. And for the start of it, I would like for you to give everybody some more context of what we're talking about right now and what you've been sort of diving into.
Okay, so basically this all started out for me. We're talking about the GATE program, which there's a lot of different terms for it across the country, but it's these sets of gifted and talented programs that have been in the public education system for decades, starting in the 60s, where people will be selected from their class as some sort of advanced learner, a speed reader. Sometimes it has to do with neurodivergence. And so these kids get pulled out of the regular classroom and put into a more specialized education program. But the weirdest thing is this huge gap in memory that almost everyone has who went into the program. And that was what stuck out. That was the thing that I've been clinging on to for my entire life, is I remember being pulled out of my classroom with like a handful of really random kids. And like that's the thing that my brain is good at, is pattern recognition. So I remember sitting there in this other classroom with like a couple of kids, and they were like, you've been selected for the gifted and talented program. And I'm looking around and I'm like, none of us have the grades to reflect this. Like that doesn't track. Like I wasn't a bad student, but I was by no means like some genius. And so I was sitting there like, this gotta be a joke, right? Or maybe I'm put into like some special ed and they're just giving it a fancy name to not hurt my feelings. And maybe that was the case. I don't know. But the strangest thing that started all of this was me not being able to remember much of anything beyond that point for years, like of elementary school. And I remember I buried that thought for most of my life until a few years ago, I heard a podcast talking about this, and they talked about just a myriad of different characteristics that not all, but a lot of these kids who went through these programs seem to share. And I fit that description almost perfectly. And that really freaked me out. And then I buried it again for a few years because I didn't really want to, address that whole weirdness. And then I saw a video on TikTok that someone was talking about their experiences, and they actually had a box set of some of the cards that they used to test us on. It was like Dr. Ryan's ESP test or something like that. And that triggered memories. And I was like, okay, I have a small platform now that I can share this stuff with. And I feel like I'm a decent presenter of information. And so I should kind of, contribute to this. If we're going to do this, if we're as a community trying to remember what happened to us and trigger memories in each other and get to the bottom of this, then I should help out. And so that's kind of what started me down this rabbit hole. And then for weeks and weeks, I was just doing insane amounts of research, trying to get a real sense of what it was before I would talk publicly about it. And it just kept getting weirder and weirder. and so then I've just like, all right, let's just start simple. And let me make a couple of videos about the common characteristics. And I know one of the biggest problems with content like that is like, you don't want to present memories to people and ask them if they remember, because that's using leading questions. You can instill in people these false memories, especially in childhood where things are a little bit hazy or far removed to begin with. And so I was trying to mix in some of my own personal experiences with some of the experiences that I found reflected in other podcasts and discussions that I resonated with, as well as this weird set of physical characteristics where, like, yeah, maybe you can ask a leading question and have someone remember a false memory, but they can't falsely remember their own eye color, or having a forehead scar that's unaccounted for, or having a prominent occipital bun. Like there are physical, or your blood type, like it's predominantly Rh negative blood type. So there are certain things that you can't really fake. And I wanted to give a healthy mix of all of that to try and be as fair as I possibly can. I mean, I'm working on a project with a few other people to actually do a legitimate research study on this, and trying to kind of navigate through these waters of not asking leading questions, but still getting valuable data. And that's proving to be kind of a tricky, nuanced process. But this content series that I made on TikTok is by no means like an official research study. So I felt pretty confident and comfortable sharing some of these other things that might lead to false memories, or maybe we're just mundane things that every school child goes through. That also is a healthy portion of this, I would assume. But once you start pulling on this thread of what is actually the GATE program, what was its origins, what is its purpose, there's a few things that you really can't overlook after a while. And so that's the conclusion of the series was really just that. It was just me laying it all out on the table, like, hey, this is some insane shit that I'm about to say, but I don't really know where else to go from here other than to acknowledge that this might be a possibility.
Yeah, make your own assumptions, because any assumptions that can be made from this is going to make me sound like the crazy guy, as if you don't already sound like the fucking crazy guy laying all this out. I'm just going to say this too, for the sake of this being out there, documented on the internet, and I would like for you, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Jake suicides himself anytime here soon, I don't believe it was suicide. Can you confirm that?
I can confirm 1,000%. Okay. I have no feelings of hurting myself. I never will hurt myself or other people. And also, there is nothing incriminating on any of my hard drives. So I just want to put that out there. I'm not trying to, have any problems. I'm not trying to really pick a fight with any three-letter agencies. I'm just trying to piece together what happened in my own childhood. And one of the biggest motivating factors with this is, like, I have a little son who is sort of approaching school age, and we're trying to really pick apart, like, what is the best path moving forward, and then reliving these experiences where my parents weren't privy to what was going on in school with me at such a young age. This was like second, third grade, fourth, fifth. Like, it's concerning. So that was a big motivating factor in me researching this, and then also putting this out there for other people, is like these programs are still going on most likely, and there's different variations of how sinister it might be. But when the government invests billions of dollars into certain research projects, I think it's a safe bet that they would continue and follow up on them, and also monitor the people that they invested in as children. So there's a lot of different factors at play, and that was like, once you throw it all into a pile, it's like, all right, I got to talk about this. I got to tell somebody else about this.
Yeah, dude. Like whenever I was listening to your series about this on TikTok, right away, the first one, you had a really good hook. You were like, "Hey, were you part of this program? Here's some weird shit going on. Like I'm about to talk about it." And right away, man, like there was the chills, because like I realized that, okay, like yeah, I was also part of this program. It was, as soon as you said this, it started immediately making me like go back into that, and I was recalling certain weird things before you even started laying things out. And I guess like I hadn't truly considered at all that this was maybe a weird thing, that there was weird shit that went on with that. It was something that I've actually talked to other people about. And so I remember the day that I was quote unquote recruited for this. So like me and my classmates, a few other classmates, got pulled into this room. I went home that day, and my mom has a story about this that I've heard her tell 100 times to, friends and stuff, because it was funny. But I came home from school and I was like, "Mom, like I'm in a special program, like for the special kids." I was like really excited. I was like, "I'm gifted, I'm special." And my mom was really concerned. She was like, and like after a little bit, like she realized like, oh, like it's like good, like like gifted and talented, this like, but yeah, it was the same thing where I was like, yeah, gifted and talented, what does that mean? But yeah, so I myself went through it, and I want to unpack some of these commonalities and things like that with you. But I think that
first, I just want to say, I would have bet a large sum of money that you had gone through this program before we ever spoke about it, because I'm dead serious. And one of the weird things that I have found is that somehow in my adult life, like 20 years after the fact, the vast majority of people that I interact with on a daily basis, including my own fiance, were all members of the GATE program. I don't know how to account for that, other than somehow there's some weird, maybe it's just, neurodivergence or whatever, but like we all gravitate towards each other, and it's very odd. But yeah, go ahead. I would love to hear some of the commonalities that you've experienced.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I feel the same way about you. I like definitely GATE program kid. But this is really, dude, the timing of all this is really interesting, because like it's been a thought in the back of my mind for several months now that like, oh, want to have Jake back on the podcast. One of those things, like I know like it'll just line up when it's supposed to line up. And I got this inclination to reach out recently to you to like, one day I was like, it was here recently. I was like, "Hey dude, like we're going to come back on the podcast." You're like, "Sure." You signed up for a time. Right then I was like, when you were coming out with all of this content about the GATE program, like right around that time, and I was visiting it, I was like, whoa. And what's really interesting about all of this too, man, is about a month or two ago, my son, he's 7 years old. He's in second grade right now at a public school here in Western Kentucky. And he is currently in the gifted and talented program. It's the first year for him. They just like recruited him. It's him and a few other people from his grade, right? And it's super interesting because every day, like when I pick him up, there's this whole sort of like regrouping, some days it's a little bit less enthusiastic, but it's like, like, what did you do today? Right. And there's usually kind of like this play by play, and then me and Jude, this at recess and whatever. I ask him this shit every day, man. He was in gifted and talented for like a month before I found out. And I found out through his mom. And when I found out, she was very much passed off as like this casual thing. And I was like, well, like, and I went to him and I was like, "What's up, dude? Like, why don't you tell daddy, like, like, that's cool. Right. This is awesome." Right. And it was just weird, man. He was like, he didn't seem, excited about it. He didn't seem like it was something he took a lot of pride in. It felt like this another thing within school that he's just kind of like, like whatever. I'm just getting like going through this thing. And so I've been not digging like toxically, but I dig and I ask like, what the fuck are y'all doing, man? And what they meet once a week. It's on Mondays. and it's for like a couple hours, something like that. And they're playing these games. Like they haven't really done any real work yet. It's all been like these like games, right? And I think he's tried to describe some of them to me, and I don't fully understand exactly these games that they're being played, but they remind me a lot of like icebreaker psychological type games. So I bring all this up to say that, like, first of all, it's something I went through myself. My son is going through. A bunch of other people are going through. There seems to be weirdness around it with my son too, in which now that I'm having this conversation with you, I'm definitely going to be digging more and kind of using him as like living vicariously. Like, what's fucking going on, bro?
Right.
You're in
Exactly.
it. You're in it. You're in it right now. But another a really interesting thing that I've noticed within my son, right, is that when I was a kid, throughout school, I was very average. I would say I struggled in almost every subject except for math. For whatever reason, math I was like scarily good at. Like I was doing like calculus. They were sending me up to the high school when I was in 7th grade to go do calculus with the high schoolers because I was so fucking good at math. And like, and my son now too, he is the exact same way. He did with all the other subjects, and he'll like tell you this. He doesn't care about them. Like, he just kind of like gets by, he's whatever the fuck. But with math, dude, like his teachers are almost kind of freaked out how fucking good he is at math, right?
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, I don't know what the connection is there between me and him with the math thing. I'm sure it's just maybe something genetic or whatever. But yeah, I think that it's really important that we're having this conversation, man, because this is something that I think has been somewhat ruminating within my subconscious as of late. Like, it's pretty new within the subconscious, and this is all kind of bringing it to the surface for me. Yeah, and I can see why you would be want to kind of piece this together yourself too, with your kiddo possibly heading into school. Yeah, where do you kind of stand with that as of right now?
So, in terms of my own son specifically, I think that as of right now, we're leaning away from public school education, and maybe do some sort of homeschooling route until we find a better alternative. I was homeschooled from 8th grade to 12th grade, so it's not that far removed from me. I know it very well. I know that it can be very successful. My dad's a teacher, so we have resources that we could utilize to really provide him a good education, and then also signing him up for, you know, fun things like, you know, swimming, wrestling, whatever he wants to do, so that you can still have that social life. Because that's my biggest concern. Obviously, I don't want him to be some weird little homeschool kid with no friends, and he's just like his mommy and daddy are his best friends. I mean, obviously, I would love to hold on to that as long as possible, but I'm trying to give him as normal a childhood as humanly possible without putting him in any harm's way. And from the things that I have learned about, first and foremost, I just want to say that there are huge variations to these gifted and talented programs. And I do think that a lot of them are above board. And I'm not trying to, cast any shadows on the education system, because I think they already have an uphill battle. And I do think that it is important to really cultivate these higher intelligence children and provide them an outlet to learn these more advanced things that they might be interested in. So I'm not saying, burn down GATE program. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I have seen and heard and personally experienced so many things that show me that there might be a dual purpose to it. And so that's, until I get some more light shed on that, because I just know in my heart that if he were put into a public school, he would most likely be selected for something like this at some point in time. And little kids are just defenseless. They don't have the ability to discern what's weird, what's normal, or even really communicate well at all. Like even what you're saying with trying to pry information out of your son to figure out what he's doing in these gifted programs. And that's a super common theme. And to kind of add to the more conspiratorial side of things, it seems like, at least in some programs, there were medications used on us in combination with some hypnotherapy to try and suppress memories and kind of compartmentalize the experiences that you have in GATE program. So that definitely, is cause for concern, to say the very least.
Right. And I mean, I guess for people who think that this whole entire concept might be far-fetched, I would say that you should be hesitant because there is a history of our government, a documented history of our government in this very sort of like black ops type of way, dipping into these things. MK Ultra is a perfect example.
And to kind of add to that further, because one of the parts of my series is I made a whole timeline, and there's a more extensive timeline that I just couldn't share it all in the video. But this is, first and foremost, this is not a new concept. Nations, governments, kingdoms, they've been doing this throughout human history. Like even in, ancient Chinese empires, they were literally searching for more intelligent children and trying to cultivate in them these different abilities so that they would be very useful to that kingdom or government, and specifically in military and defense. So this is kind of a precedent that has been set, and it also is logical. It makes sense, and I'm not even necessarily disagreeing with it in some respects, because I want, the country that I live in to be secure and run by very intelligent people. So it's not necessarily all bad that the government has taken interest in the education of young children and trying to find kids who might be more adept at certain tasks or psychological abilities, and then to utilize them in their own defense and intelligence roles. That makes sense to me. I don't think that's even really a leap that you have to take. It's just logical. Yeah. And even it's evidenced by real world things. Like one of the things I talk about in this history of the GATE program is during the Cold War, we had the Sputnik incident where the Soviets were able to launch the first satellite into Earth's orbit. And that caused mass panic within the US that we were behind. And that started the whole space race and all of this stuff. Immediately after that, which you could say is reactionary to it, there was something signed into effect that was called the National Defense Education Act. So right off the bat, like very simple terms, we are linking education of children to national defense. So this all seems very logical, and obviously we can get into like the deeper, darker, more conspiratorial things that they may have been using certain children for, but it just, from the outside, it's not really that crazy of an idea. At least I think so. I don't know. I'm pretty deep in it right now.
I don't think it is, man. And like, okay, so when you look at all of this, right, and I know this is a very sort of like loaded question, and there's a lot of speculation involved in this, but you're somebody who, as of recent, has been very much drenched in this and thinking a lot about it. And I feel like for most people who consume your content or consume your content around this idea or get introduced to this idea, their mind probably starts rattling off in a lot of different places, because it opens up this like Pandora's box of questions in a way, right? And like, I think immediately to me, where my mind went to was intuitively felt into a lot of what you were just saying of like, I'm not trying to like say that they're aliens that are dissecting every single one of us, but like there's probably something to this, right? And then that intuitive feeling of like there's probably some truth to this, there's something going on, led me to, well, what exactly is it that they're looking for in people, right? Because to me, the way that all this seems laid out, it doesn't feel like they're just looking for people with like a high IQ, right? Like there's different types of intelligence. There's different types of intelligence. And some people, when I say that, they might think of and point to immediately like emotional intelligence. And I think that that's massively important, super underrated. But is it like, there's some people, dude, out there. It's so hard to tell sometimes, because there truly is this sort of dichotomy of like, well, how many of you are the second coming of Jesus? How many just think you are? You know what I'm saying? Right. But like, what is it that they were looking for? Was it like spiritual intelligence? Was it the lizard people? Like
basically, I think that it's all of the above. I think that they were casting a very wide net and seeing what results they yielded to see how they could utilize kids. And so probably a healthy portion of it is just plain and simple advanced education and trying to help kids who have super high IQs and maybe skip a couple grade levels and really provide them the education that they desperately need so they're not bored out of their minds in class and act out. And a lot of these children end up being on some sort of neurodivergent spectrum. And so they might also need a specialized education plan. But within that, and one of the points that I bring up is why I think there is so much variation in our experiences is because they were specialized classes for specialized roles, where some people were just doing speed reading tests. Other people report very interesting psychic testing and almost like psychic predictions of what the next card would be. Some people talk about being tested on whether or not they could see an aura through the box, right? So there's a wide degree of things that they were testing for. And right around the time that these programs, these gifted and talented programs really took off and started becoming widespread in our education system, was the same time that the CIA was doing things like MK Ultra or Project Stargate, which was specifically researching these mind control abilities in connection with psychedelics and also the ability to remote view for espionage. So if they had even an inkling that children might be more predisposed to these abilities before they hit puberty, they're probably going to research that. And they're probably going to do it in a mundane way, in a way that is very easy to tell the public. It's easy to tell parents, oh, your kid is gifted and we're going to put him in a special class. And to kind of add to the murkiness of this topic, a lot of the techniques that they used on us are mirrored in regular things that are done to all kids. So like one of the biggest things that triggers people's memories of this GATE program is using these really old, clunky, grayish green headphones. And those are the same headphones that we use to test all children, all school-age kids for hearing deficits. And I'm a nurse. I was trained in pediatrics. I've literally administered these tests in schools, in the nurse's office. So I know for a fact that it's the same looking test. But the difference is we don't put those kids in those headphones for hours a day, multiple days of the year, and testing them on the predictive ability of certain things. Like the hearing test is just to make sure that you can hear in both ears at all different frequencies. Some of the testing that was done in these GATE programs was designed to see if you could predict which ear the tone was going to come in. That doesn't test for hearing deficit. But if you go home and tell your parents, oh, they put me in headphones and made me listen to weird sounds, the parents are going to be like, oh, yeah, I had that. That was a hearing test. And that's another thing that's been reflected often in the comments is I will bring up an activity that at face value isn't that weird. It's not weird at all. But the way that they were using it on these kids is the weird part. And so that's, if I was the CIA, that's how I would design it. That makes perfect sense because you can have all these kids going home and even sharing what they did in the GATE programs, and it doesn't sound weird.
Yeah. I think an important aspect of this, something you've been alluding to throughout the entire conversation is, well, if you want to argue the validity of this without knowing for certain, one great thing to look at is the incentive structure set in place, right? Like what? So in the government's case, right, there are sort of incentive structure that they were operating on and always operate on, will continue to operate on, is like this strategic deterrence and survival as a nation. Like the nation becomes like this entity, and that entity, similar to human beings, will do anything it needs to protect its own sort of survival. And so when you look at like our military and what we prioritize our spending on in this giant sort of game of 5D geopolitical chess that is being played at all times, if we're willing to dump fucking, I don't know how many hundreds of millions into one single stealth attack plane,
Right.
it's like,
right.
it's not far-fetched that they, and also too, this would almost become a necessity as a nation. If you had any inclination that any other nation out there was doing something similar, it would become a fucking necessity. And obviously maybe over the course of 30, 40 years, this didn't really pan out as they thought it would, you know, kind of like MK Ultra, but also this is another aspect of all this that's really interesting to me. Is and the question that I have for you is, you know, what has this led to within certain individuals who really recalled this? And have you talked to, like, you know, because your TikTok videos on this subject now have like hundreds of thousands of views. It's like, have you had anybody reach out to you who's like, yeah, like, I'm CIA and like this was, I mean, like, what has the feedback been like, man?
So, you know, I'll say this first. It's all anecdotal, and it's on TikTok. It's on the internet. So you don't know who you can trust and what stories you can believe and who's just crazy and wanted to catch my eye with the DM. But I will say the overwhelming response from people, they are in military roles. I've talked to a lot of people in the CIA, NSA, Spec Ops, just various roles in the military, some robotics and weapons developers, just everything that you can think of. They have come forward and confirmed a lot of the things that I have said, just in terms of like the experiences, but also some of the maybe sketchier framework of it or its purpose. And also, too, another big thing that makes this sound even crazier is it seems like there is a pattern to children that they select, not just on maybe IQ or EQ, but more so on genetics and bloodlines and ties to secret organizations like Freemasonry. And I think that has a big part of this. And I even had experiences where someone reached out and said that they remember the GATE program, and they remember that there was 2 tiers. I've had multiple people say this, that there was 2 tiers to this program. And because their parents worked in secret special projects for the military, they were in this other tier that took them to weird field trips and did very weird testing on them. So I think that there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of lies being thrown around about what this program actually is. And not everyone who is in the program is going to experience the shadier side of things. And that makes it even harder to really, you know, uncover these things and whistleblow on it.
Yeah. Another aspect of this that just amps up the weirdness for me within my own reality tunnel is, okay, one of my good friends a few weeks ago, he had called me in the morning time and was telling me about this dream that he had. And this is something we do often, like we're good buddies. And he's been working a lot here recently with Amanita and like been having these really crazy dreams and using that as a sort of tool to dive into some of these subconscious places and things like that. But his family, and I'm not going to disclose this person's name right now, but his family is very wealthy, and like their lineage is very notable, I should say. And he went to a private school. And so because it was a private school, and I don't know this, but I'm just thinking out loud, I'm guessing this, because it was a private school, this is how it played out. He went to a private school. He didn't have the gifted and talented program, but he specifically had a military person came to the school for him, and he went through, it was like a few year long process, and then it was like this weird detachment. He was telling me this story a few weeks ago, dude, because like he had within his dreams revisited this like thing. And what was funny is that the dream wasn't even just about this. Like he mentioned this to me in like the context of some other, you know, insights and things that were going on in his life. But yeah, this brought that back up for me too. My friend, who is part of a really wealthy family who went to a private school, got in this. I need to talk to him after this podcast about his experience.
And sure. He's not alone in that experience. I've had several people reach out and say the same thing, where they weren't officially in some sort of gifted and talented program, but they were taken out of class by military personnel and done these battery of tests that I, you know, describe in this series. So I like I said, there's so many different versions of this and different probably end games that they were entertaining for these different tests. But there's something there. There's something weird going on that they didn't want us to know about.
I find all of this like really interesting in terms of that it's happening right now. And I think that it would be interesting happening at like any time of history. I think things like this probably have happened throughout history. But when you were on my podcast the last time, one of the things that we were talking about, it seems like a common thread that I've been having in most of my conversations is like, man, the world is getting really fucking weird. You know, like we're kind of reaching this like I don't know. It's this point of weird. Terrence McKinney was talking about this. He's like, it's gonna get so weird. You know, you're gonna. All people can do is talk about how weird it is.
Yes,
right?
dude. Yeah,
yeah, and that's kind of how like life in general in this world kind of feels right now. But then also, this is just another thing, like adding on to it of like, oh, if like they were recruiting spiritual psychics within this time, and I guess what I was gonna say is that if you think about it, right, these things are sort of like our true nature. Um, there's a lot of history of them being suppressed, you know, at different times. But if it is our true nature, if that's really what we're like called to, where we come from, um, that's going to bubble itself up at this, like bubble up at times, regardless of how hard you try and suppress it. And so like the 1960s and everything that happened with LSD is a perfect example of that. Maybe that was divine intervention. And maybe also it's like, it was fucking matter of time that something like that happened, you know, with all the suppression. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of that as well too. You know, it's like, if truly there is something to this, not only some individuals having some sort of unique psycho spiritual thing going on, maybe as children, right, these gifts or these abilities are amplified. And maybe not only that, maybe there's an element of like, that's when the gifts and things start to show themselves, and it necessitates a sort of fostering and loving and cultivating of those skills that traditional sort of society doesn't offer people, right? And within, if you think like indigenous cultures, the shamanic cultures, this is how they approach it a lot of times. Is like children at a certain age will start showing certain abilities, and they kind of take them off. Like, hey, no, you're going to learn this way of life instead. Like what you have is really important, you know, to the collective, right?
right.
And so this to me feels like almost like a weird Americanized version of that in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it's like a very weird digitized espionage type of shamanism, at least for a small group of kids that went through this GATE program. And I know for me personally, I experienced all sorts of crazy stuff growing up as a little kid, but because I grew up in an extremely rigid religious environment, I didn't feel like I could share any of this stuff. Like I remember as a little kid, I would have these really weird experiences of what I can only describe as communicating with aliens. And I remember I told my uncle once, and he made fun of me so bad for it that I never told a soul about it again until recent adult life, because that was, you know, pretty damaging to me as a little kid, being like, no, this isn't like a made up story. This isn't my imaginary friend. Like I am hearing things that don't make sense. This isn't just like talking to a human. And so I feel like there's this weird aspect to all of this where those abilities will bloom in young children and also maybe get turned off a little bit as they approach puberty and get into adulthood, and those things start to shut down as we assimilate into this, you know, simulation or reality or whatever. And so if any of that is true, then it would make sense that someone investigating that is trying to get to the heart of the matter with children. Like that would be the best test subjects, and they would be very easy to manipulate and coerce and, you know, suppress their memories through trauma. So I think it's like a perfect storm where it kind of makes sense. It's not as maybe pleasant as shamanic cultures in some of these, you know, indigenous tribes, but it does seem like they are piggybacking off of this stuff.
Yeah. So with all of that said, now I would love to hear a little bit about your experience with it and what you recalled and like what researching all of this brought up for you.
So it's going to be hard for me to kind of recall all of it because it's so fragmented in my mind, and it's not a lot of these memories they're not normal memories. It's this weird flashback of almost a gut feeling. Like, you know, when you hear something, you hear bad news and your stomach drops. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of just this weird intuitive knowing that something happened to you, but I don't have access to a legitimate visual memory of it. And then also some of the memories that I have are not in first person. It's almost like an out of body recollection of me seeing myself in these classrooms. But I can tell you, based on what I remember right now off in the top of my head, I remember being, like I said, selected for this program and then not really remembering anything after that. One of the specific things, I do remember the headphones. I remember that the majority of these classes took place in a trailer on campus. So I wasn't actually in the school building. It was one of those like pop-up office temporary things. And sometimes that trailer was normal and I was with other kids and like my friends and we were just, you know, doing fun stuff. And then other times the trailer was not normal and all of the windows would be covered up with this like tan paper. Sometimes it was blue paper. And those are the times where I was by myself or with one or two other kids. And sometimes I would go into the trailer and they would have these really old computers set up and we would have to play these games. And specifically, I remember Oregon Trail. Like that was a deep cut memory for me. And it wasn't like, I remember that a lot of these things that we did on that computer were set up like a game, like it was supposed to be fun. But I remember this gut feeling that this wasn't fun and it doesn't feel like a game to me. And it feels like a weird test. And I don't don't like the feeling of not being clued into what's going on. I hate that. Like I have a strong sense of control. And so I didn't like being lied to about this stuff and having them pretend that these were games. And a lot of the things we did was time based, like they were constantly timing us on things. One of the very specific memories I have is with something called tangrams, which is these like colorful geometric shape blocks. And we would have to very speedily take these blocks and do these tests and reshape them into objects and things like that. And another thing that I remember is having to build a lot of things out of construction paper, like 3D objects and buildings and stuff, out of random objects like arts and craft supplies and stuff, but primarily construction paper for some reason. A lot of the things that we did are just, it seems like these tests on your ability to do abstract things or think out of the box and do it in a timely manner. One of the other big memories that I have of being tested on a lot is something called the Stroop test, where you'll have a list of words that are the names of colors, but the words will be printed in a different color than what the name is representing. And it was a time test to see how many I could get through accurately, where I would say the name, where I would say the actual color it was printed in rather than what the word is representing, if that makes sense. It's kind of a hard test to really describe verbally. But you can look up the Stroop test and you'll find pictures of it, and that might trigger memories for other people. But there was all these things that were, it seemed like one big test. Like I was some lab rat and they were trying to see what my brain can do in these weird conditions. And I definitely remember using the headphones as a meditation tape and being instructed to go through these mental gymnastics to try and basically, you know, hypnotize myself. I didn't know what anything was happening in the moment. This is all just adult knowledge that I'm bringing to the table to try and contextualize what was happening to me. But there was these weird nap times that we would have to do, listening to different music or noises or having the headphones on. And there was times where we would have to, you know, keep your eyes closed. And I have other people who had brought some more specific details to it that I don't remember. But one person reported saying that they would have to like listen to this weird background noise, and the small class would have to keep chanting, your mind, your body is a temple, your mind is a soul, while visualizing a pyramid. And that was like part of their nap time. So I think that there's a lot of these things that are going on that are very reflective of the weird things that I've been drawn to as an adult, like the gateway tapes, trying to, you know, elicit astral projection experiences and stuff. Like, one of the other things that I remember is field trips. This is a big gap in my memory for me, so I don't have many details. Other people have shared stuff that sounds vaguely familiar, but not enough to really like concretely say I did these things. But one of the things that I remember is a very, very small group of us were taken to a planetarium, and the whole experience felt very odd. And in my perspective as a little kid, it felt pointless. Like, I didn't really understand why we were doing these things. And that's one of the things that stuck out firmly in my mind with all these experiences that people were bringing to me is three of the most popular places that kids were brought to on field trips is a planetarium, an aquarium, and a cemetery. So, and another thing that people mentioned a lot is NASA. They were brought to these different NASA buildings, these satellite campuses, and like meeting with astronauts and things like that. I don't remember anything like that. I do remember going on a lot of field trips, but the only one that really sticks out in my mind as a weird gate program association is that trip to the planetarium that it was odd to me. I didn't understand why a handful of us were in the planetarium. And so that's kind of, I could probably remember more as we are talking through this, but those are some of the prominent ones that I started to unravel as I researched this more. And the other thing that I distinctly remember is having to drink this pink drink out of these Dixie cups. And that is a vivid memory for me. And I know that a lot of other people have had that experience. And I also know that the official narrative on this is that it was some sort of fluoride, some sort of dental treatment, or some people reported that it was designed to show the plaque on your teeth to help you brush more effectively. And that, I think, my gut reaction to that is it's the same as the hearing deficit test, where there was a more mundane cover that was used on all kids, and then some of us got maybe a different pink drink in those cups, and also the frequency of it. Like, that would have been, if you were teaching kids about plaque and brushing your teeth, that would be one lesson for the school year. I remember doing this a lot of times, drinking this weird pink purplish liquid out of a little Dixie cup. And so that just adds to some of the oddities of it. And I can speak a little bit more on that drink. I had one person come forward. I'm not going to give too many details because he was pretty hesitant to even talk to me. But allegedly, he comes from a family that was in charge of certain gate programs in his local area. And he was able to allude to the fact that these gate programs, or at least a portion of them, are some sort of an extension or end result of MK Ultra, and that the pink drinks, in combination with different hypnotherapies that we use the headphones for, were designed to get the programming deeper into our subconscious while also compartmentalizing those memories and suppressing them so that we don't have access to them as adults.
Whoa. Okay. So my mind immediately thinks, like, what the fuck was in those pink drinks? But then, okay. Yeah. All right. So one thing that seems to be very common, like a sort of commonality within this, that I experience, it seems like the people I've talked to sort of experience this. Seems like your story seems to allude towards this, but it seems like it's not like these projects, these investigations into kids. Most of the time, at least the majority of people that we've talked to about it, it's not like, oh, I was in high school and I was still doing this. It like exists for like a certain period of time, it seems like, for a lot of kids. And so this notion that you're making that it's very wide sweeping, but then a few maybe quote unquote climb the ranks would make sense. So I'm going to break down my experience with it for you just a little bit. I was right around Hudson's age. It would be disingenuous for me to say like what age, I don't remember exactly, but right around like probably 7-ish, second grade-ish, third grade-ish, something like that. And it was like me and one other person from my classroom, and then there was like a few other people from the grade. who were pulled into this. It was within our school. It was another classroom, but it was another classroom that I hadn't been in before. And same thing, they busted out these old computers, right? And what they had us do, like, it's like you described, super fragmented. My memory of it is individual, like, select memories and moments,
Right.
but what I do remember, man, is, like you said, we were playing games on these computers. These games didn't necessarily feel super fun to me, and I also had this intuitive feeling of like there was something else being done here that I wasn't fully let in on, and it kind of pissed me off to a certain degree. And I even noticed within some of the other children that they were super excited to be a part of this thing, whereas I felt kind of like what, like, well, what is going on? Similar to what I'm seeing within my own son, where he's super excited to talk to me about just about everything, but this one thing in particular here as of late seems to be like weird. He doesn't seem to be like super proud of. He doesn't seem to be like scared to talk a bit or like ashamed, but it's just like this weird thing. And so, yeah, it was this classroom. And I also remember one of the activities that they had us do. I think they had us do a bunch of different things, but this is the only one I really truly remember, was the games on the computer. And then we all had to read this certain prompt out loud. It would be like maybe a paragraph at most. And it was very simple things. It would be like, Susie went to the grocery store in Virginia, you know? Um, and we had to all go through and read these out loud one by one. We'd read the same thing, and then we would like interpretize it and to, like, tell like the group what we thought it was actually like saying. And I remember, the reason I think I remember this one activity in particular is because there was a moment of humiliation that I experienced where I was the first one to go, and I was reading this paragraph out loud, and the word Virginia came up, like I had said just a minute ago. It was in the context of it was very much like a normal sentence. It was Virginia, but I accidentally said Virginia. And so I have this really like hardcore locked in memory of that moment in that particular activity, because there was like humiliation that I kind of experienced. But
Right.
yeah, man, those are some of the activities that we did. And then, when I was watching your series, you listed out throughout that series a lot of things that commonalities that people who went through this program experienced later on in life. And there was two really big ones that stuck out to me. The I would say, yeah, so it was the hearing voices, right? Like that's something I remember so clearly. And it was right around the same age too when I had this issue and I would say it was an issue because like what I experienced, it was like I was scared of these voices. And um, I remember it was a whole deal within my family because my mother was actually quite concerned about me for like, it was like a year or two where I remember like they were always like kind of like haphazardly asking me like, did you hear voices last night? Because like I told my parents like that classic thing you don't want to hear kids say of like, which I don't know, I would be okay with hearing my son say this, but I hear voices, and I don't think that that was something my parents knew how to grapple with, and it was definitely very much passed off as like either this is a phase or this is schizophrenia, right? But I so remember hearing these, and like you had described it in the video, it was just like that. It wasn't like I was a part of this conversation, and at times when I was a part of it, it felt like it wasn't like I was being led in on it. It was like something was being directed at me, like a message was being said at me, But there was like these mumblings that I would hear, and it was always late at night going to sleep. These mumblings that I would hear is like other people having conversation in the same room as me, but simultaneously kind of far away from me. Um, yeah, and that's a big one. The second big one for me that um, I experienced commonality was the near death experience
I
of
knew you were going to
drowning.
say that. I knew it. I knew it. I would have bet
Dude,
money on that too.
dude, this is one of my most formidable experiences. I've probably talked about this on my podcast at some other time before. Hell, I may have even mentioned this story to you in passing before, but when I was 11 years old, right, I lived in Florida at the time, and went out on the boat with my buddy Casey and his dad, and we were in this bay. We were tubing, right? And for people who don't know, tubing is like you have a big rubber fucking thing that you pull behind a boat and you skid across the top of the water. It slings you all over the place. It's really fun. It's a water sport. But we were on this big round inflatable tube, right? Me and Casey. And usually you have to pull up on the front of the tube, kind of pull it upwards so that it catches the surface tension of the water and stays on the surface, kind of when it gets pulled by the boat. Well, me and Casey were talking to one another and we were leaning down on the front, like pushing it like almost like into the water, the front of this tube that was slightly deflated, by the way. And his dad, who is this like nice, goofy guy or whatever, he took off really quickly to kind of give us like that jolt and to like be funny, you know? Well, what happened, because we weren't ready for it and we were pushing the front of the tube downwards into the water, as soon as he took off full speed like that, instead of the tube catching and like starting to skid across the water, it nosedived straight underwater and was pulling me and Casey with it. And in this moment, man, mind you, like truthfully, I probably came nowhere near close to actual like physiological death. Like it was probably a matter of 8 seconds by the time like the tube got pulled underwater and I came up out of the water. But something happened in this chaos, right, where it truly felt like I was going to die because I was trying to get away from this tube, but the current of it was so strong that it was pulling me deeper and deeper underwater into this black abyss. And I had this DMT-esque moment where, you know, people say like your life flashes before your eyes, and that I would say that was what happened to me, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like I had visions or like I was going back in time to certain memories. What I had was this comforting gnosis that it was like I was slipping away simultaneously, yet like everything was going to be okay. And I was also saying goodbye to the people I loved, right? And so I was having like this very DMT-esque in the void, slipping away moment. It was my first mystical moment in my life. And then, you know, I was wearing a life vest. And so like I got brought back up out of the water, and I'll never forget that feeling of coming up out of the water, man, and realizing like I wasn't going to die. It felt like I was reborn. And then later in my life, whenever I revisited DMT, it was very clear to me, and this is a story I've told to a lot of people that I've talked to about like DMT, but it was very clear to me that what happened to me at 11 was some sort of like mystical DMT-esque experience. I'm not saying that it was just endogenous DMT that was being pumped through my head. I think likely it was some sort of like neurochemical cocktail of different things, you know, DMT plus NMT plus, you know, hormones and whatever the fuck. But yeah, dude, I had the fucking NDE of drowning and the hearing voices.
Yeah, dude, I was really hesitant to share my experience of the voices because that was something that I have been, I guess, kind of like afraid of my whole life. That struck fear in me as a little kid. And like you said, it was this weird, it was like a group of men mumbling about me in the distance. And that was like a frequent thing. And it was hard to understand these mumbles. And then sometimes when they were speaking directly at me, they were like cursing me out. Like I would hear all this profanity as a little kid and just be like terrified. Like, what am I going to do wrong? And like I said before, I grew up very religious. So I don't even think I told anyone. I don't think I told my parents because I was terrified that it was demons. Schizophrenia wasn't really on my radar back then. And I thought that it was some sort of demonic influence and that it just terrified me. I was scared to go to sleep. I was scared to take a nap. Every time that I was in that state of about to fall asleep, those voices would present themselves. And it wasn't until later on when I started experimenting with the gateway tapes, these meditation tapes, that I experienced that again. And it freaked me out again. And I was like, okay, this is maybe hurting my mental health. I don't really want to go back to that. I don't want that experience ever again. And so I didn't touch the tapes for a while. But it was really healthy for me to hear so many other people agree and confirm and be like, hey, I've never heard anyone else talk about this, but that happened to me too. And so that was comforting in some ways. And then the near death experiences, so many people reported drownings, like so many. And there are some biases that I see with this. Like obviously, you know, drownings, like the number one most susceptible population is going to be young kids. Like that's one of the biggest dangers of children in school would be swimming pools and things of that nature, because they're not good swimmers. So there's a lot of different factors at play. I recognize that, but just the frequency with which kids who were in this program also experience these things really stands out to me as some sort of statistical anomaly. It doesn't really make sense. And I had an experience myself with near death. I don't, like you said, I don't know. I was a little kid. I don't remember much. I do remember blacking out under the water. It was during the swim test at a summer camp, and I went under. I just, my body gave out. I wasn't a very strong swimmer when I was little. And I remember going under the water and blacking out. And then sometime later, I remember having a lifeguard kind of wake me up at the side of the pool. And so I don't know. I don't know if I would necessarily classify that as near-death experience. So, you know, no one was shocking me back to life. But as soon as I heard other people talking about that memory immediately flashed in my brain. And that's something I haven't thought about since summer camp. So it's not like these things are constantly plaguing me. If anything, these are memories that I have repressed. I am deliberately trying not to think about them, like these voices that were in my head falling asleep. I do everything in my power to never think about that again, because it sounds so crazy and like a mental health problem. But these talking about the GATE program is just filled with these triggers, these specific experiences, these phrases, these pictures will just cut you to your core, and it will flash back these memories inexplicably. I don't even know if we were talking about near-death drowning in other contexts, I would have even remembered that. But for whatever reason, it's hard to ignore those things. It's fascinating.
Yeah, dude. This entire conversation, first of all, like preparing for this conversation brought up a lot for me and brought a lot of things back to me. But within this conversation itself, a lot of things have come back to me. So I had this moment, this is maybe a month or two ago, but my parents live right down the street and they have like a nice like workout area in their basement or whatever. And so sometimes I'll go there to work out, right? And I was there, it's rough estimate, like I said, a month or two ago, working out in their basement. And there's this picture of me that we've had for a long time, and I've seen it in different places, but my mom had just put it up downstairs. And it was a picture, my third grade school picture, right? And there was like this emotional thing that happened, like me looking at this picture of myself, like on the wall of, you know, in third grade, and it invoked in me and brought back this mushroom trip that I had one time. Okay. Wow. And I even, like, in the process of all this, a month or two ago, I took a picture of this picture on my parents' wall, and I like started writing up this whole Instagram post about like this mushroom trip and stuff. And then I stopped myself because like it was once again fell in line to this whole, like, I know how fucking crazy I sound right now, but this mushroom trip I had, this was several years ago. I took a very large dose of mushrooms, and the visionary experience I had was I went back in time and to my childhood bedroom when we lived in Colorado, which was right around that time, like first up until about fourth grade-ish, something like that. We lived in Colorado. And that was when I went through these gifted and talented programs. And I was going through a lot with my dad and like family and stuff at the time too. In this mushroom trip that I had, I went back and I was seeing myself at like, 8 years old in my childhood bedroom crying. I was like crying, right? And in this mushroom trip, I was like, I could feel like that myself, my younger self, like didn't know I was there, but it was like this urge of like, I want to like comfort him right now. Like I wanted to like comfort, like truly like my inner child. It was this really moving, beautiful experience for a lot of reasons. But, I remember having this feeling of like truly like I was like sending myself love, like trying to like comfort myself. And it was because it was myself. And I recalled like what the fuck I was going through like at that time in my life. It sounds dramatic, right? Like I'm 8 years old, but I remember.
I know exactly what you're talking about. It cannot be understated how intense this is.
Yeah, and there's for some reason, dude, there was something about this time in my life around like 7 to like 9, like right in there, dude. Like I went through a lot, and it always happened to me late at night, laying in bed, going to sleep when I was by myself. Like there was moments where like I postulated forever, I postulated God, I tried to like astral travel and see what forever felt like. There was the voices. The voices was a big part of it. The voices led to this whole thing, dude, where I was like sleeping in my sister's room some nights and then like asking my parents to sleep with them, but them being in like this stage of like, no, you're a big boy now, like you need to stop with the voices thing, you know what I mean? And so like this whole mushroom trip was like I was sending myself love to like this little being, this little version of myself that was truly like kind of confused, but like I guess like I'm having a hard time right now wrapping this into the context of everything that we're talking about, but I thought of it because like that was the time in my life when I was hearing these voices, right? And I had a mushroom trip where I went back, and it was like my spirit body was like trying to comfort the little version of me hearing these voices.
That's fascinating. I have so I can speak to the voices a little bit more now because I've revisited the Gateway tapes many times since then. And I will say that one thing I've noticed is when I get to the point where I'm hearing that mumbling, that I know I'm on the threshold of astral projecting. And so there's definitely, at least in my own personal experience, there's a huge connection with tapping into whatever that state of consciousness is and being just about to leave your body and have a weird experience. And oddly enough, I had another meditative experience that is very similar to the one you're describing, where I may have talked about this before. I made a video about my sensory deprivation tank experience, but one of the craziest things that happened throughout that experience was I woke up as my 8-year-old self. Like, I don't know, like I went back in time across the country. I was in Pennsylvania again in my childhood bedroom, and I was sleeping in my bed, and I woke up out of a nap. And then I was just like, that was like thinking about my adult life now. I was like, oh, that's a weird dream. And then I went back to sleep and then woke up again in the sensory deprivation tank as me. So like, I feel like there might be these, it's almost like wormholes, like these
Mm.
specific points in our own personal timelines that intersect with each other.
Yeah,
And
like
when you,
Interstellar.
right, exactly. And
Yeah.
when you reach these certain headspaces, you kind of can go into any one of those exit points and revisit that time of life. The third like seeing yourself as a child, that's such a cool and powerful thing. I can't even imagine how useful that was. And I'm on a crazy note, I do believe that you probably had influence on your younger self. Like it's almost like this weird circular time loop thing where if you experience comfort in that moment when you were a little kid, it was probably a future version of you sending you that comfort.
Yeah. Yeah.
Time's an illusion or whatever. So it makes sense from that context. But yeah, dude, that's super powerful.
Yeah, dude. It reminded me so much of the Interstellar scene where he realized that it was himself the entire time. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying? And I'm like, I'm getting like kind of teary eyed thinking about it. But yeah, man, it really wouldn't surprise me if it was, And I had another experience one time where the whispers, and this, mind you, I hadn't heard the whispers, the voices since I was like little, like heard it in that way. I was 20 years old. I was going through a lot, dude, a lot. And I'm sure you can guess, like, there's a lot of reasons. Um, but I was in this really deep meditation in my bedroom for several hours, like going through spice withdrawals. I was on the fucking tail end of a mushroom trip. Like, I was in a crazy place. And so maybe what happened was truly just like a hallucination, but the whispers became animated and real in the way that I was going through so much, and it had been several months since I had been back to the DMT space, and I had been doing a lot of like work in this place, the real world, and I had this inclination that how I was really gonna like cap it off and move forward powerfully in my life was going to be this really big DMT trip. And I was really working my way up to this. And I was thinking about this a lot, and I was meditating, and I was praying, and I was crying in my bed, and I heard physically, like as if somebody else was in the room, they said, "Come home." Right? And the next day, I went out into the woods. I took a shit ton of acid because I had tolerance from the day before, and I smacked that DMT pipe, dude. And I had like one of the most beautiful transformative healing experiences of my life. But it also kind of reminded me of like maybe it was like an interstellar moment where it was like me from the future going back in time once again to tell myself something like, hey, come home. But so all of this past and time things, what you said, like wormhole, this brings me into like what I feel like is one of the bigger questions of this podcast. You had mentioned earlier on this, you had notion towards like, okay, like false memories. Like I see that, and that's a real phenomenon. It's a very real, prominent phenomenon. But it's like you're taking everything you're saying into and taking that into context with it, right? And kind of keeping it with a grain of salt because of these things. But also reminds me of a conversation I was having with my buddy on the phone earlier. There's this idea that, and this is put forth a lot within like quantum physics, but like we have this idea of the past, that like the past happened and like that's what's led us up into the moment that we're at. Like with this idea of time is like linear. The past led into the present. Now the present's going to lead into the future, right?
Right.
But like quantum physics and a lot of like different interpretations of it, that past thing there, they will say that likely and probably like the past is malleable in terms of like, so we can say right now like this idea that there's a cross out there at the church down the street because some guy named Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago died for our sins, right? You know, and maybe that's the case, but maybe like somewhere along the way the cross came, and so fucking Jesus, the reality of Jesus became real, you know?
Right. Right. Or
Yeah,
even just the amount of people who believe in that can maybe sort of edit the past to make it believable and then have real world evidence to support it. I mean, even things like Mandela effects, which is a whole other rabbit hole, but it seems like the linear time that we have come to know and love is genuinely malleable and subject to change. And the things that we know or theorize with these more quantum physical mechanics of our reality, where we suspect that reality changes when observed, what would be, the ramifications or effect of being able to have this out of body experience and observing your childhood again from a fresh perspective? Is that observation having a direct impact on linear time? Like there's so many kind of questions or theories that you can have based. I think it's all dancing around some greater truth that, we won't probably be able to ever articulate, but it makes sense to me, at least from my own experience.
yeah. Yeah, it's I really have enjoyed your whole series behind it because it's very much this. I think it's important. I think it's super fascinating. I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to it. But I think you keep a very nice balance of, hey, I'm laying all this shit out for you. Here's what I found. Make up your own decision about it. And it's so funny to me because it's one of these subjects in particular that is so compelling, with so much real world anecdotal evidence behind it and documented evidence behind it,
right?
That there's something to it.
And I will say, just to kind of almost play devil's advocate as well, and this is another concern that I've had, is we have all these kids who are claiming to have gone through the GATE program and then also have these weird psychic phenomenon or experiences with alien abductions or talking to aliens or channeling different entities outside of our reality. And another possible answer to all of this is those things were, we were psychologically manipulated as children into believing and experiencing those things. Like, I don't know. I feel like maybe there's a healthy bit of both, where the government was very legitimately trying to research these more out there things, but then also maybe seeing if they could replicate it in other children, maybe targeting neurodivergent kids who are more susceptible to things, and seeing if they could get them to believe that they were communicating with aliens or having a God experience. And I know personally, one like very specific problem that I keep running up against is, and I feel like we may have talked about this before, but there's this specific entity that I see all the time. And I know that it's like a version of me. It's like extremely Masonic, but it's like this flying pyramid with eyeballs, right? Like the traditional Illuminati conspiracy theory bullshit. I've met this guy multiple times, and I've talked to other gate kids who also kind of channel this entity. Actually, someone that you and I both know, I was questioning her about her experiences in the gate program, and then I just laid it out. I was like, hey, have you ever seen the flying pyramid with eyeballs? And she's like, yeah. Like, so the reason why that concerns me is, where is that
pyramid
coming
with eyeballs
from?
right there.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's
a pyramid with eyeballs.
Where did that come from? Is that something that we have this ability to communicate in these and tap into these higher dimensions, and we are meeting very real, legitimate entities and gleaning information from them? Or is this some sort of kind of like psychological operation where the government is trying to see if they can induce these experiences that are fabricated? And another thing that concerned me was this entity that I have met before and communicated with, the cult that I grew up in. That was the whole cult is stemming from this one guy who channeled that same entity. Not many people, it's very limited information about this, but essentially that is where the doctrine from the cult first originates, is this one guy who was claiming to channel this basically flying pyramid guy. And so, like, again, I raised the question, is this a legitimate experience that I'm having, or was I brainwashed? Was I MK Ultra'd into having these experiences? And I don't know if I'll ever get a satisfying answer.
Okay, dude, this is about to get really interesting.
Good.
Have you heard of the concept of a tulpa?
No.
Okay, so what? And I'm gonna butcher this. So anybody listening, please go Google this shit. I'm spun out, fucking acid head. But tulpas, right? It's this Eastern sort of esoteric idea, right? And a lot of it's centered around like a meditation, sort of visualization practice. But what the practice is taking certain energy and thought patterns and behavior patterns and projecting them onto this other being, in the way of, if there's enough time spent in this, enough meditation, enough energy put into this thing, the idea is that it becomes a tulpa. It in a way becomes almost self-autonomous and anthropomorphized. In a way, it becomes like a being, right? And so what you're saying here really like brought tulpas to mind for me, right? This idea that it's like, okay, it kind of reminds me of the difference between what is a demon, quote unquote demon, and what is like bad energy, right? I think it's like the tulpa thing. I think it's like the bad energy is like the energy that like eventually can become like the anthropomorphized, self-autonomous, like sort of demon.
Right.
And this tulpa thing is something that has been talked about for like hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, it's one of those things. A lot of people practice it still, like within those Eastern philosophies. So like, it wouldn't surprise me if like the government is doing this massive sort of like esoteric experiment and casting a wide net, if there was a bit of this like tulpa experimentation and play in that as well too. Like if we truly have these kids direct enough energy and focus into this thing, can we have them tulpize? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
I believe that. And that was one, my own personal experiences with this pyramid entity were brought back to the surface again when someone came forward and told me about that chant where they had to visualize a pyramid to be able to have these out of body experiences or what have you. And again, that was solidified by another thing I had when I was first researching astral projection. I was getting really deep into it and really trying to understand all the techniques. And I eventually stumbled on this technique that was allegedly used in ancient Egypt, where it's a specific chant that you have to do and a specific body position that you lay in. But while you're doing the chant and laying down in this position, you're supposed to visualize the pyramids of Giza. And that is what allows you to come out of your body. And allegedly that was what the ancient pharaohs used to do in their practice. So there is definitely something specific with the shape of a pyramid for whatever reason. And then to kind of to give credence to this concept of a tulpa, there was a study that was done relatively recently within the last decade or two. And I don't know, I can't remember the specifics anymore, but it was a study on group meditation and the potential powers that could result from it. And they took a large group of people, I want to say like more than 100 people, and all had them focus on a city. I think it may have been Chicago or Detroit, but I don't remember. And I think it was over a long period of time. They had this group of people meditate and focus their energy on this city and try and fill it with love and peace. And the result of that study was that I can't remember the specific number, but there was a statistically relevant decrease in crime in that city. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors at play. These things are so hard to measure, but even if you just look at the power of manifestation that people, believe in their own lives on an individual basis, if you want something really bad or you have a little vision board or whatever it is, like eventually, if you focus all of your time and energy and efforts on that, it's going to happen. Like that's just the path that you're leading yourself down. So I think that there's probably a lot of truths to this topic of what we were doing in Gate, what the powers of, manifestation and meditation are. And I think that it's kind of like that wormhole issue where it's like, well, if you can edit reality, you can edit the past, change the future and manifest it, then what's the difference? Like if enough people believe in demons and Jesus Christ, then they're real. Like that's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's so intriguing, but it's very difficult to like give concrete answers on anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and this entire conversation has played on so many different things, like different topics that I've been exploring here as of late. Yeah. Yeah, dude, this has been fucking crazy. This has been a really, really fun conversation. I really appreciate you, dude.
Man. I'm happy to come on and share the insanity of the updates of my life.
Yeah, you do. You're my audience's favorite schizophrenic.
That's my favorite title.
Yeah, man. Is there anything else you'd like to leave people with? I think for right now, I'm pretty much tapped out. But dude, I know that we could just infinitely keep going.
Yeah, especially on these topics. No, I guess I just want people to approach all of this with a grain of salt, like we mentioned a bunch of times. And just to kind of re-emphasize, like, I'm not trying to attack specialized education or these potentially good programs that are designed to help children who have intelligence or who are able to do certain subjects in school really well, and then they are progressed further than the average student. I think that that's always going to be super important and something I advocate for. But just while you are advocating for these specialized education programs, it's super important to keep an open mind and remember who's the backer. Where's the money coming from? Like it's the government. And do they ever do anything out of the kindness of their heart? Like, has that ever been a factor where they implement these programs that are just designed to make us better citizens? Like there's usually an ulterior motive, especially when billions of dollars are being spent, and it's seemingly and kind of rightfully so that the number one priority for the government is to protect itself, is to ensure its future. And so it's kind of a very nuanced way to approach the subject, but I do think that's important. Like I'm not saying to everyone go out there and attack your old teachers and hit them up for information about gait. Like I don't think that's advisable, but I do think that it's worth investigating, not only for your own personal experience in trying to sort through these memories or lack thereof, but also, you know, if you have kids and they're approaching this age or they're in the program or any one of those things, like it's important to consider. And it's exactly like what you're doing. Like have an open, healthy dialogue with them and feel them. If you know your kid, you know when their personality changes or they're kind of being weird about something, like you can tell when they're lying. So yeah, that's probably how I would wrap it up. Is, you know, I'm not trying to take on the CIA or anything or shut down schools. I just want to know what happened to me. I want to know what happened to us as kids and why I can't remember it. And it's not just like this blanket memory loss. I remember everything else about school. I loved school. I was in a cult. My only normal friends were in school. So like those are my fondest memories, but there's a huge gap in my memory when it comes to this weird program that I was selected for. And so yeah, I hope more people keep digging, and honestly, I hope a lot of people are able to comment on this video with their own experiences and hopefully just keep adding to it and keep compiling more data. Because every time I share more information that people have given to me, it triggers even more people to remember things about their childhood that they forgot. And even if it's nothing sinister at all, that's still important. I think that's really cool to be able to remember details about your childhood.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things of this entire thing has been reading through the comments on your videos, man, and seeing the collective energy that's being built behind it, right? Because I'll just second a lot of what you just said. I mean, when you look at it, it's, you know, our government, they're going to do something, especially something that takes a lot of time and money and resources and coordination. There's going to be an incentive structure behind that as to why they're doing that. And there's just so many anomalies and weird sort of tidbits of this particular program. All of that in combination with our government has a history of doing this shit. Yeah, dude, I think that this has been a really fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to see how this unfolds, see what people comment down below and stuff like that. But yeah, I love you, dude. I appreciate you, everybody. I will put all of Jake's his socials and things down below so you can go check him out. He's got awesome content. He's an awesome dude, and I love him dearly. But yeah, peace out, guys. Much love.